If you don't mind, I'll start with a very short intro before giving the floor to the presidents. I'll start by saying thank you for dialing in. My name is Oscar Verlinden from the European Microfinance Network. And on behalf of the European Microfinance Network and the Microfinance Center, we are very happy to host for you today the 6th European Microfinance Day Central event. The title of this Microfinance Day is Weathering the Storm. For obvious reasons, I think we're all very aware of the circumstances that we're in. But in fact, today's event is the starting point for a campaign, a coordinated campaign that we will be doing across Europe with the help of our members, the microfinance institutions, where each institution locally will be doing things, a sort of a joint campaign to further promote the visibility and understanding of microfinance. So that's what we're here today to celebrate. Before we continue, we want to also note that today's event is made possible with the financial support from the Employment and Social Innovation Program by the European Commission, and also by our sponsors, the EIB Group, consisting of the European Investment Bank, the EIB Institute, and also the EIF. I'll just as a reminder for today, I'll walk you through the program really quickly. So first, we have a few opening addresses. We have the presidents of both of our networks giving a welcome. We have Manuela Galeng from DG Employment giving opening remarks. We have Mr. Oliveira Martins from the OECD giving a keynote address. And then once these opening statements have been done, then we have a panel discussion on ensuring access to finance for entrepreneurs during COVID-19. On this panel, we have MEP Monica Semedo, we have Shadine from the European Commission, we have Monica Scatasta from the Council of Europe Bank, and we have Bruno Robino from the European Investment Bank. And then finally, after this panel discussion, we also have the European Code of Good Conduct Award ceremony. If you'll remember from last year, we also had this during our physical event. Now we've figured out a digital replacement for this. And first we have some opening words from Nicolas Costello, the Deputy Head of Unit from DG Employment, but also then a video from all the MFIs across Europe to thank everyone involved in creating the code. So you have that to look forward to at the end. So what I'll do now is I'll go back to the start. And in fact, I'll stop sharing the screen right now. I'll stop with this PowerPoint. And I will give the floor to Elwin Grunewald, the president of the European Microfinance Network. Elwin, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oscar, and thank you so much for the team for organizing this event. Great event today. And dear friends of microfinance and social finance in Europe, my name is Elwin Grunewald. I'm the president of the EMN Network. And on behalf of all board members and the management team, I would like to welcome you to this already 6th European Microfinance Day, with a very appropriate title, Weathering the Storm. Last year's theme was Empowering Tomorrow's Entrepreneurs, and little did we know how different tomorrow would look. For 7 months now, our world and lives have been dominated by the effects of the COVID-19, with far-reaching consequences for all of us, but also in particular for our customers, small entrepreneurs and people already in vulnerable positions, now extra hard hit by the lockdown measures. They need us to weather the storm. Now more than ever, we can show our value and worth as social enterprises. And it is wonderful to see how all of our members are doing their part. I've heard about many fantastic initiatives to support micro-entrepreneurs. To name a few, a massive increase in communication with clients to understand the situation and adapt MFI services. An exponential growth in help desk activities, webinars, and crisis mentoring sessions. Countless loans restructured. Fundraising efforts resulting in emergency loans with better conditions, and greater use of existing and new digital services to facilitate interaction with customers. All great initiatives by MFIs, social banks, mentors, and even governments. It is very encouraging to see how many government organizations today acknowledge that microfinance is an important foundation to combat the negative effects of the coronavirus. And microfinance is needed to stimulate economic development, not only in this moment, but also in the coming years of economic reconstruction. In that context, we are extremely pleased that the new European Commission budget for microfinance and social finance will likely increase over the coming years through ESF Plus and InvestEU. Microfinance will be needed more than ever. And I sincerely hope that all of our members will see their added value and impact grow significantly in the coming years. Together, we can weather this storm. I wish you all a very inspiring Microfinance Day. And now I would like to introduce you to Lucia Popovska, the President of the Microfinance Center Network that we are partnering with. Thank you so much. Lucia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today in this sixth time we gather together to talk about microfinance in these extremely unusual circumstances. As Elvin also mentions, we are all aware not only on the impact on our personal lives and how our world shrank and became different and how our anxieties rose. But when we look at the microfinance industry as a whole, this is an industry that caters, as everybody in the audience knows, to some of the most both economically and socially vulnerable people on our continent. And the landscape of the small and micro and medium enterprises changed dramatically, and that caused the lives of the microfinance institutions to change dramatically. Suddenly their portfolios at risk started looking completely different from almost 1 week to the next. Their clients are struggling, or our clients are struggling with meeting their obligations towards the MFIs. On the other hand, their need for liquidity changed dramatically. The microfinance industry is extremely known for living our lives very close to our clients. We go to their homes. We sit and do analysis of their businesses with them. Our loan officers are in daily face-to-face interaction. Suddenly, a lot of this became impossible. The pressure to be able to reach the clients in a different way, the need for digital, the need for technology, which we have always acknowledged, but we have not always been equally able as the more formal financial sector to invest in, suddenly started also pressuring us and became a lot more visibly needed. In this landscape, I believe that both of our networks and a lot of it together have done a lot to be alongside the industry, to understand what is going on, to support it, to open forums and debates where discussion, advisory, counseling among ourselves, sharing of experience can happen. Many of the institutions responded, such as the Commission, who quickly adjusted the IASI program, right? Many of the investors came forward, yet there is still a lot of need of joint action to ensure that the industry stays afloat and nimble and is capable to reach our clients in these changed conditions and prevent the complete economic erosion of some of the most vulnerable people in our societies. And to this regard, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation together with all of our partners which are present. And even more so, I consider this, or we at the MFC consider this yet another contribution to the efforts to enable the industry to now more than ever be there for our end clients. So I wish everybody a very fruitful day, and I'm excited about today's conversations. Oscar, I give it back to you.
Thank you very much, Lucia and Elvin, for these opening words. Very good. Then we shall move on to the next speaker. That's Manuela Geleng from the European Commission. Manuela, you have the floor. I'm not hearing Manuela. Is anyone else hearing Manuela?
Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Good. Okay. Good morning to you all. I'm very happy to be here and at this meeting. And I would like to thank the European Microfinance Network and the Microfinance Center for organizing this conference, obviously online. And I'm very happy to be here to represent the European Commission. I think this day, this European Microfinance Day, marks an important occasion to come back every year and build awareness in Europe around the impact that a small loan can do to help citizens in the fight against unemployment and social exclusion. Unfortunately, today, if we look back, what has changed since the last edition a year ago, as citizens, small businesses, local communities, economies, and society at large, we see that the coronavirus pandemic has really hardly hit all of us. And these are challenging times for European microfinance, as microfinance institutions and clients have come under a lot of strain since this pandemic emerged. And this, obviously, if we look at micro enterprises and those who are self-employed, but also more widely microfinance institutions, have been severely affected. So I do think, as previous speakers have already pointed out, that weathering the storms captures really well the mindset in which we are currently all. So the storm has brought challenges, obviously, in terms of client repayments, because large numbers of clients are not repaying according to schedule, which affects the portfolio quality. There are liquidity constraints, providers being unable to meet operating costs on our saving withdrawals, issue loans, challenges in terms of operations and business continuity, and difficulties with maintaining the provider's social missions. And for micro enterprises, more specifically, this has brought also difficulties to access new credit, financial pressures to reduce demand, and immobility affecting supply chains and closing down businesses. And not to mention the difficult macroeconomic context both sides need to operate in, which results in slow and negative economic growth, and unemployment, and other challenges. So in order to weather the storm and to help the sector recover and rebuild, it is indeed in need of support both at the national and EU level. And as you have certainly seen, the EU has been taken the storm very seriously. A lot of funding has been mobilized already in spring this year to support member states and to protect life and livelihoods. And we are working on all fronts to contain the spread of the virus, to support the national health systems, and to counter the socio-economic impact that the pandemic has brought forward by taking unprecedented measures. And let me just recall some of those. In as early as March and early April, the Coronavirus Response Investment Initiative mobilized 37 billion of unspent cohesion policy funds to provide member states with immediate liquidity. The SURE initiative, which is an acronym that stands for Support to Mitigate Unemployment Risks in an Emergency, has 100 billion and is an instrument to preserve jobs during the crisis. So you may have heard in recent days the announcement about the billions of euros that the member states that have activated this scheme are now being entitled to. And in addition to that, financial support for hard-hit small and medium-sized enterprises in close cooperation with the European Investment Bank. In addition, the Commission, looking forward to the next few years, has put forward on one side an ambitious budget for the period 21 to 27, but also an unprecedented recovery plan to help repair the economy and the social damage that the pandemic has brought, to kickstart recovery and protect and create jobs. This recovery plan is normally called, comes under the name Next Generation EU, and should bring 670 billion euro to power the recovery and support the green and digital Europe. But it's clear that if we want the recovery to work, it must also be fair and inclusive, and one in which nobody is left behind. And clearly, micro enterprises represent over 90% of European businesses. They are the motor that powers our economy and will help fuel our recovery. However, if we look now at micro enterprises, and I include here also the self-employed, still there is difficulty in accessing credit, from traditional bank finance to large startup or scale-up, and they have difficulties in startup and scale up their businesses. So, and even before the storm, and a recent study had shown that the financing gap in this area is about 12.9 billion euro a year. That is, clearly there is a need for increased supply of microfinance for micro enterprises and vulnerable members of the population. So, and this study has also highlighted the important role that EU support has played in developing the microfinance market. And let me now speak about the EU Programme for Employment and Social Innovation, also known as EASY, because under the period from 2014 to 2020, the total EU support for the sector has amounted to over 800 million euro. And these 800 million are expected to mobilize an estimated 3 billion euro in financing overall. The European Investment Fund, which has been mandated by the European Commission, has reached close to 140 agreements with financial intermediaries all across Europe under the EASY Guarantee instrument. And here the EU steps in to help the intermediaries to lend more by guaranteeing some of their loans. In practice, if we look at what the EASY program has supported, has done over these few years, it has helped micro entrepreneurs start up their business, to scale it up, to purchase new equipment, materials, and supply. The types of businesses supported have been as diverse as you can imagine, from offering sustainable tourism, fitness and nutrition, or digital services. When you are buying clothing from recycled materials in Italy, sustainably and environmentally friendly produced foods in the Netherlands, or accessories in Sweden, you might have unknowingly just visited one of the micro enterprises that have received support under the EASY Guarantee instrument. In total, we reckon that around 280,000 jobs have been created or sustained thanks to your support under EASY and its predecessor, the Progress Microfinance program. In the next program period, the Commission will continue its microfinance support beyond 2020 through the InvestEU program, which will feature a special window on social investment and skills. And as already was mentioned, also ESF Plus will be able to support microfinance in the member states, if a member state so chooses. So, to conclude on a more positive note, if we look at the ongoing crisis, I think there has been a published analysis that the storm, as negative as it has been, and it is, can bring or may bring even some opportunities for the sectors. And I think what the storm has brought is, I think it has brought even stronger to the fore the systemic constraints in terms of the fragmented regulatory framework, the dependencies on limited number of funding sources, or areas for improvement in the burgeoning digital ecosystem. So this might help raising more awareness and support to address these constraints in the future, fostering ever closer cooperation within the sector. So I think with this positive note, in looking how to use the negative opportunities to better in the future. So we see this cooperation here today, thanks to the European Microfinance Network and the Microfinance Centers, as a good starting point for looking into the future and doing even better in such difficult times. So I would like to wish you fruitful discussions today, and I look forward to hearing how the microfinance sector is rising to this unprecedented challenge that we face today, and how it can contribute to a fair and sustainable European recovery. Thank you.
Wonderful. Then with that, we shall also pass to Mr. Joaquim Oliveira Martins, who is the Deputy Director at the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship and SMEs. This is the same department of the OECD who publishes on a regular basis the Missing Entrepreneur publication, which, as many of you will know, is one of the foremost reference works, especially in Europe, but also wider, on the status quo and the challenges of inclusive entrepreneurship. So with that, Joaquim, I'd like to give you the floor. I've given you the presenter role, so feel free to share your presentation as well.
Thank you, Oscar, and really thank you for giving this opportunity to the OECD to present our work on this important issue of funding for entrepreneurs. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if it works. Okay. Is that working or not?
We can see your entire screen at the moment.
Is this okay? No. Okay. Okay. We have a little problem.
Yes, now we can just see the PowerPoint presentation. Indeed, and you just need to switch the screens.
Yeah, I switch the screen. Okay. So is that okay?
This is perfect.
Okay, great, fantastic. Sorry for this little adjustment. Okay, so I'm going to talk about inclusive entrepreneurship and startup finance in this post-COVID world. So let me give you first some cross-country evidence on the impact of this crisis on entrepreneurs. Okay? So the first point is that indeed that the entrepreneurs, in particular, of course, SMEs, have been really at the center of the shock of the COVID-19 pandemic. The entrepreneurs are disproportionately concentrated in the sectors that are being the most hardest hit. If you see in this chart at the right, you see some sectors like wholesale and retail trade or construction. These sectors, which are really populated with entrepreneurs and small entrepreneurs, have been really extremely exposed to the shock because, for example, we have a very high share of self-employed and employees in this sector. The job insecurity. Job insecurity is about 3 times worse about self-employed than among employees. So these sectors where the share of self-employment is very large, of course, have been affected by the fact that indeed even the measures of support sometimes are difficult to reach the self-employment and certain types of small and medium-sized enterprises. Of course, the prospects for insolvency, for risks of bankruptcy are very high. When we did our first survey, this goes back to April this year, on the impact of the crisis, we're announcing something like half of the businesses that could be in the risk of bankruptcy towards the end of the year. And now the numbers that are sort of emerging are around 20% increase in bankruptcies in 2020 and 2021. Among this category of entrepreneurs, I think the what we call the underrepresented groups, sometimes we call it the missing entrepreneurs, have perhaps been even more hardest hit than the whole segment of entrepreneurs. For example, segments like the youth entrepreneurs or women have been extremely affected by the crisis in proportions which are, typically higher than for the whole population of entrepreneurs. I give you some numbers on the types of financial assistance that you receive to the coronavirus pandemic, and you see indeed that this assistance in many items tend to be bigger for male than for female entrepreneurs. Now, the picture is quite bleak. We have to say it, but at least up to now, of course, now we are in this. For example, in Europe, we are located in France, and yesterday the president of France announced a new sort of confinement in the country. So we don't know exactly what is going to happen, and we are indeed in this kind of more pessimistic scenario where indeed the disease is going to continue up to the end of the year and after. So, but still, when you look at the rates of enterprise creation, new business applications in the US or creation of business in France, it was in France, for example, was affected in March, April, and then it rebounded. In the US, you see this rebound in 2020 compared with the same profile of business applications in 2019. So there was a bit of a regain of activity in terms of entrepreneurship, both in the US and Europe. So perhaps this is a certain element for optimism in the middle of this very big uncertainty and shock. So how have governments responded to this very big challenge? Well, basically they did several things. Of course, this is pretty well known. So of course, the first emergency was the health measures. Then very quickly there was a number of deferral payments and avoidance of temporary sort of liquidity issues. Then accessing to credit for entrepreneurs, loans. Basically, you can give money, you can lend money, or let enterprises exit. But as far as possible, governments trying to avoid the exit, because although before the crisis there were a lot of discussions about a number of enterprises which were not perhaps viable, some studies call it the zombie enterprises. The share of the zombie enterprises in many countries was much smaller than the numbers of enterprises that can be in the risk of bankruptcy. So I think there was a very strong business case to indeed support the enterprises and avoid sort of useless bankruptcies. Access to credit, provision of grants, of course, wage subsidies, the schemes of partial unemployment have been used in a massive scale in many countries, and then slowly moving to what we call the structural policies. Of course, this is very important because if you prolong this kind of short-term liquidity support, at the end you may actually prevent the structural change. And I think a lot of people are convinced that this crisis is not a business as usual type of shock. I mean, the economy is expected to go back to the previous state before the crisis, despite the fact, of course, this is an exogenous crisis to the economic system. I think there will be structural changes. Some sectors, for example, were in a state perhaps of overinvestment, of tourism or air transportation, for example. So there will be certain sort of structural change that's going to take place. So it's very important to make this bridge between short term and long term. And this, I think, is perhaps currently the biggest change, it's a challenge for government. Now, the policy response for entrepreneurs and SMEs was very comprehensive and ambitious, as I said, but it differed a lot across countries. I have here some numbers of the immediate fiscal impulse, then the measures around deferral payments, and then other liquidity support and debt guarantee schemes, loan guarantee schemes made by governments. And you see that if you compare, a number of European countries and the United States, these shares of these measures, at least in percentages of GDP, are quite different. For example, in Europe, clearly Germany was perhaps the country that was in a position at the fiscal space to, in some sense, create this immediate fiscal impulse to the economy. And this is comparable with the kind of support that was put forward in countries like United States or UK, and also in Japan, which is not in the figure, but the support in Japan was also very good. Now, you see, for example, in other countries, the use of these loan guarantees by the government was huge. For example, in the case of Italy or Germany or UK. So, the amount of these measures, as you see in this column, it was very different across countries. You take a country like Denmark, this is only around 4% of GDP compared with 32% in Italy. So there was a support, there was a very strong sort of intervention by governments in all countries, but the extent and the type of support was different. Now, let's go back now to this issue of financing in more detail. So let's look now before the crisis, before the COVID crisis. What was the situation? Well, the situation was basically that the economy was basically recovering. I think the financing of SMEs and the state of non-performing loans among the SMEs were more or less stable. Was higher than on average for all firms, as you see in this chart on the right. So the growth rate of these non-performing loans for SMEs, the category of SMEs was a bit higher than for the rest of the economy, but still this growth rate was more or less stabilized. Lending was a bit subdued. There was a decline, observed a decline before the COVID crisis of the new lending flows in many OECD countries, despite the favorable conditions, despite low interest rates and the lending conditions being more generous, more flexible. So this was the condition. So in some sense, it was good that there was not so much strain and pressure in terms of the financing before the COVID crisis. I mean, the class of entrepreneurs and small and medium-sized enterprises was confronted with the COVID crisis, perhaps in a situation which was perhaps less risky, dangerous than it was, for example, some years after the 2008 financial crisis. So I think this was a positive sort of point, I would say. Now, the uptake of non-bank financing instruments, or things than just bank lending, was also actually quite strong. So the lending was a bit subdued, but the uptake of these new instruments was very strong. Things like leasing, hire purchases, the factoring activities all have increased. Online alternative financing was also something that was likely to have increased, although we lack a bit of comprehensive and comparable data across the OECD. Venture capital, the chart here in the right shows the growth in venture capital investments between 2018 and 2019. So we're talking here before the COVID crisis, and you see that in many countries this growth was really strikingly sort of high. Now, what is the situation now? So this was before the COVID crisis. What is the situation now? The situation now is that basically the thing was a bit reversed. So the lending was subdued, and the uptake of new forms of financing was dynamic, was strong. But now, actually, is a bit the opposite. I think the lending during the crisis sort of held up. You see a sort of an increase of demand for loans with no significant tightening of credit standards, for example, in the Eurozone, in the UK, in North America, in Japan. But on these new alternative financing instruments, there are concerns. There are concerns on the early stage of equity finance, decline in seed and angel investments in the US and in China now. So concerns about trade financing, likely to be strongly affected given the pronounced decline in both supply and demand of international trade. Of course, the shock of international trade in 2020 is going to be huge, much bigger than the shock of international trade after the crisis. Leasing and hire purchases, lowering delinquencies are likely to rise, which is expected to lead to fewer activities. So the current situation is a bit the opposite of the things that we observed just before the crisis. Now, coming now more specifically to microfinance, I think there is a number of challenges that are now present and perhaps have been a bit exacerbated by the COVID crisis. So clients face greater difficulty with repayments, issues of business continuity, business performance, negative future outlook, a lot of uncertainty. We don't know, basically. We don't know, now we are in the middle of the second wave. We don't know if it's going to be a third wave or not. We don't know if the things will be more or less stabilized in terms of talking health conditions towards the mid of 2021 or will take longer. So huge economic uncertainty and a negative future outlook. So also operational challenges for the microfinance institution in terms of the portfolio performance. Of course, how can you be performant in this kind of very difficult situation? The demand for credit is uncertain. A number of issues of credit rationing, risk management, client relations, operational challenges, cost reductions, and use of teleworking. So this makes that segment of microfinance, as the other alternative financing segments, is being affected by the current crisis. So what is next? And I'm sort of now going to conclude. Basically, there are several important lines. First, access. So how to ensure a fast-track access to support SMEs and self-employed while ensuring accountability. How can we ensure that instruments are reaching all entrepreneurs? I think here, for example, the role of the subnational government is extremely important because a number of these measures that were decided, so the emergency liquidity support measures that were decided by central government, sometimes didn't reach actually the most vulnerable categories of entrepreneurs. And here, I think the role of subnational governments, subnational layers of government, have been extremely important. We have a number of examples in many countries, Canada and others, where this city and regional governments or provincial governments are very important in reaching, for example, young people, female migrants population of entrepreneurs. So this is very important for this idea of financial inclusion. So sustainability. How can alternative financing mechanisms and channels can be leveraged to avoid over-indebtedness of entrepreneurs? Of course, all these support measures, a lot of these measures, specifically in many countries, were associated with debt, was not associated with lump sum support, grants, because basically some countries were not in a position to have this public expenditure, so that they went on that. But of course, these debts, okay, are more easy, are being facilitated, they are guaranteed by the state, but still they create the pressure in terms of the long-term, medium, long-term solvability of entrepreneurs. So it's very important that we ensure that this long-term solvability of entrepreneurs is actually enhanced by the use of these alternative financing mechanisms. How do we ensure that lenders and microfinance institutions are sustainable? How do we avoid the collapse of the entrepreneurship ecosystem? Because all this is very related to systemic effects. Now, on business dynamism, there are basically three things you can do. You help the enterprises and the entrepreneurs to survive. You facilitate you facilitate the exit when sometimes perhaps enterprises that are in a very good position before the crisis exit the market. I think this is important. Or you promote entry. That the survival and the exit in some sense policy lines are limited almost by definition. Support needs to be phased out at some point. The exit, I see, given these numbers, is something that can need to be used with caution because we can lose a lot of entrepreneurial capital. So the most interesting, let's say, policy line is indeed the promotion of new startups. So, how could we support innovative entrepreneurship, second chance entrepreneurship, very important, and creation of startups. As Madame Guilaine sort of referred, this issue of the regulatory sort of frameworks, all these sort of nexus of policies are very important. And of course, as I said in the beginning, moving towards structural responses, how to move from this crisis management mode to structural policies that can enhance entrepreneurs' resilience and competitiveness over the long term. So this is a bit the landscape currently, but of course, perhaps we have much more questions than answers at this stage. But I think this discussion about microfinance, of course, is a very important one because indeed, this missing entrepreneurs, which is the focus of this report of the OECD. So we have published an issue of this report in 2019. The next issue is going to be published in 2021 towards the fall. One of the thematic chapters of this report on missing entrepreneurs is going to be precisely microfinance and immigrant entrepreneurship. And the work we do at the OECD is really to provide these international comparable indicators on activity rates, various characteristics, and also to provide country profiles. And I finish by giving the list of perhaps relevant publications from the OECD, and I stop here. I think I did it on my time, so this is 10:30. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joachim. That was a very, very good presentation, very helpful. And then it was really a good stock taking of the status quo where we are at the moment. And we're very much looking forward to the next edition in 2021 of the Missing Entrepreneurs. And that brings us to the next element in our programming today, which is the panel discussion on the importance of providing access to finance for entrepreneurs. As our speakers today already mentioned, recently there was a publication by the European Commission that did a market analysis of the microfinance sector, and this was before coronavirus happened. And that market analysis concluded that there was it estimated that there was a market gap of financing for microfinance of about 12.9 billion euros per year of unserved demand, of unmet demand. Then, of course, coronavirus happened, and I very much like the wording that Lucia used in her introduction, the economic erosion that this caused. The entrepreneurs and self-employed who are, the ones who our sector tries to support have gotten into even further difficulties because of this. And for this, to address this, we have a number of stakeholders and allies around the sector who help us to deliver these services. And today we have a few of them here represented on this panel. We have both from the political side and from the financiers side. And from the political side, we have MEP Monica Semedo with us. She's in the Employment Committee of the European Parliament and also in the Social Economy Intergroup. After Mrs. Semedo, we will have also Shadeen Giratam from DG Employment, from Anne Branch's unit. speaking at the European Commission. And then we also have Monica Scatasta from the Council of Europe Bank with us. And then finally also Bruno Robino from the European Investment Bank. So welcome very much to all of our panelists here today. And we will first have some time allocated to each one of these speakers. And then if time allows, at the end, we will also have a brief question and answer session where you can raise your hand to ask a question. Either you can ask them in the chat on the right in written, or there's a little hand icon next to the little megaphone icon on the right-hand side of the interface. So with no further ado, Mrs. Semedo, I'd like to pass the floor to you. So,
thank you very much, Oscar, also for the invitation and for the very interesting presentations we had so far. Gave a lot of insight to the actual situation. How to ensure access to finance for entrepreneurship or entrepreneurs during COVID-19. I mean, it's a difficult time. First, we have to tackle the health issue and the problems we face in the health systems of many member states. But it's a difficult time for people, for both people and economy, especially for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, and especially for self-employed. I was self-employed before. I got to the European Parliament in my mandate, so I really feel with the people struggling, not knowing how they will pay their bills in 6 months. Many things have been said, but we are now facing a partial lockdown, a second lockdown in many member states. I'm still in Brussels. We'll head to Luxembourg soon. But as you see here in Place Lux, almost everything is closed. And you know that they went through that phase already in spring, all the restaurants and the bars, for example. So even when shops are open, there's not enough business to pay salaries. So they have to refer to short-time working schemes. Fixed costs need to be paid. And of course, you always have the Damocles sword up over your head, like what will happen next day or next week. You can't really calculate as an entrepreneur these days what will happen in a month. So I think it's also psychologically a very difficult time for companies. Yes, we mentioned the Corona Response Investment Initiative, where unused funds, cohesion funds, money could be used. I think it was like a miracle that from one day to another, the state aid rules were loosened, which was unprecedented, and nobody would have imagined that this would be possible. But this crisis did it. I actively worked on it in the Ample Employment Committee. So it still has to be voted, but it will be like a direct financial boost for enterprises, but as well for social programs, which is important because no one should be left behind in this crisis, because we need everyone also to guarantee the European project and the cohesion between the member states and the people. The short-term work schemes, it was easier to do it in Luxembourg. In other countries, it didn't have the framework for it. So this ensures jobs. This ensures jobs over time. We have to see now how long the pandemic will take, and how long this measure can really help or find new ways to ensure jobs. And of course, we are waiting as Parliament. We want a strong European budget, long-term budget, and of course a strong next generation EU. So the recovery plan. It's up to the heads of state to decide on that. But I think the European Parliament has made a clear statement in the name of the citizens they were voted from. So as a Luxembourger, I would give some small examples how it works in our little country, but also to look down, as in each country had a great impact and brought a lot of difficulties with it. So I would highlight that, in fact, the key message from Luxembourgish government is solidarity. It's solidarity between the member states. So that this European project, the cohesion we have, and the interdependence we have will not be damaged in the future. So sometimes you have to be more solidary in order to save something that in the future will give you much more back. So solidarity is the key word for Luxembourg, and not only solidarity but investment. Already 3 billion euros have been invested in Luxembourgish economy and people. This was the mantra of the government, which is also my party, so the Democratic Party, already in 2013 to invest in infrastructure, in people, in education. But this time it's really again on top of that what was already planned. You may know that Luxembourg didn't have a high state debt in the past. Now it has risen to almost 30%, but this is a sacrifice because the future of Europe, the future of a whole generation is at stake. And I think, and I clearly support that also in all the reports I'm on. It's needed in these times to help people and to invest into people. 2010, during the financial crisis, the banks were like the cause of the crisis. But now, especially in Luxembourg, they are part of the solution. They give access to loans with a favorable repayment term to enterprises, which is very vital for the economy because they need liquidity. They introduced moratoriums to enterprises, so they, for a few months, they did not have to pay back their loans. Now they are beginning to do so, but they also had the time to restructure and adapt the enterprises and the services to the circumstances we are now unfortunately living in. And also additional loans where the state bears 85% of the risk. So all in all, it was 2.5 billion euros that were invested in the support of companies. And other supports were like really quick help, 5,000 euros per SME, also for self-employed and artists, for example, which could not plan, or they had plans, but they could not plan what will be in 2 months. And so artists, for example, some of them get the minimum wage so that their survival and livelihood is safe. I think the safety, because we can't plan what will happen next week. We didn't know in July or September that we will have the rising numbers of infections as we have now. So, and I think to give a little bit of security and support, I would say, well, support to overcome the next 2-3 months from governments, but also from the European Union and all the funds and programs we have. Is very important. One other, as I'm also in the CULT committee, I would also mention not only artists, but also the tourism sector, the cultural sector, hoteliers. In Luxembourg, we had the initiative that you got a voucher from the government in order to do a vacation at home, but also to all the 200,000 frontier workers we have each day in Luxembourg. Just to count, Luxembourg has 600,000 citizens, residents, but 200,000 frontier workers. So it's really multicultural from Belgium, Germany, and France, and also they got a voucher This should also be a stimulus for gastronomy, for hoteliers, and tourism attractions as such, although in Luxembourg it's a little bit smaller than maybe in other countries, but very interesting. I just can invite you. So it was mentioned also by Joachim, the self-employed and youth and women that have a huge impact or that bear a huge impact, and I think it's very important to support them. Therefore, I was very happy to work on the youth guarantee, the reviewed youth guarantee. But one thing is even more important, and I'm really supporting it. This is to foster an entrepreneurial spirit in the European Union. Means entrepreneurial skills to foster, to create them, to make them grow from an early age on, as well as financial literacy, playful, like in primary grade, first grade, and then like in concrete projects during high school. We have a project called Mini Entreprise in Luxembourg, and the winners of this year, although under COVID circumstances, they delivered food, so like boxes of food, and they made a high profit, but it's not just that. They will continue. Some of them, they are from one school, they will continue to do so. Also a young woman, and I think that's very important. We should foster that from an early age, and because young people nowadays, they have so innovative ideas that will also contribute to a more digital, more sustainable, more fair, more socially fair society in the European Union, and we should really, really give them the chance to do so. But as well, to give them access to finance, of course. We have to find new ways of financing. Just to say, crowdfunding is one of it, but I think in the next years there will come other possibilities, other ideas, and I'm looking forward to it. But I think investing into people and companies is very important. Education is important, so we have smart people that find the solutions for the future. But yeah, my little message at the end would be to all the entrepreneurs, maybe in micro or small or medium-sized enterprises, and all the people who work for them, with them, is to, we don't know what will happen, unfortunately. If we knew, it would be easier to react immediately. But Renew Europe and I am really, really trying to do the best to get all the echoes from all the sites and to integrate them in the papers we are working on. And Renew Europe doesn't only say enterprises are the backbone of the economy of the EU, but they are. So they need our full support, as well as the people that are working for them. And so that was my final word. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Semedo. Ms. Semedo, this is it's really encouraging to hear these words and to hear all the activities that you do at the Luxembourg and the EU level. We need really strong allies like yourself inside of these committees to ensure that indeed the social aspect, the social dimension is reflected, as you just described. The importance of things like financial literacy, entrepreneurial spirits, accompaniment, in general, support for Europe's entrepreneurs is absolutely crucial. So thank you again for all that you do. Great. Having said that, we shall move on to Shadeen from the European Commission, DG Employment. Shadeen, I have passed you the presenter rights, so if you would like to share your screen as well, feel free to go ahead and do so. You have the floor.
Thank you, Oscar. Good morning, everyone. Can you see my presentation?
No, there's something a little bit glitchy about it. We can see part of the PowerPoint, but for some reason not entirely on the screen.
Okay.
Now it's looking a lot better.
All right, I guess I have to switch screens here, right?
Exactly. Then it'll work.
Sorry, if you bear with me. Is this better?
This is absolutely perfect. Thanks, Shirin.
Okay, thank you, Oscar. So, good morning, everyone. And so, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a real honor to be on this panel with such esteemed guests. I must say, I mean, it does mark a very important day every year for the European Microfinance Day, so it really is a privilege. Now, before I go into my presentation, which you're hopefully able to see here, so what the Honourable Member of Parliament did mention about minimum wage, I would like to also just mention that it can be of also interest to everyone here today that actually yesterday the Commission adopted basically a proposal on the European EU directive for minimum wage. So basically to ensure that all workers are able to have a decent minimum wage to ensure a decent living. So I think this is a very important development that must be shared, and is also in line with the political guidelines of our President von der Leyen, and also in view of building a fair, more inclusive Europe. So I did want to mention that. Now, my presentation here will be focused on 4 main points. The first is actually if we look at the pre-COVID, so before all this happened now almost 6-7 months ago, access to finance actually was already a central theme to the part of the policy response that the Commission and the EU was actually putting forward in order to support inclusive entrepreneurship, but also, of course, to support job creation and in essence, foster social inclusion. Now, over the past decade, I just want to recall there have been a series of different measures that have been taken in terms of putting in place various support measures to support the microfinance sector. Microfinance being, and I think it's important to recall it, it is a very powerful tool to empower citizens, but also those who want to be entrepreneurs and who can be, because let's not forget, not everyone can or wants to be an entrepreneur, basically to open up new opportunities into the labor market through, it can be, for example, self-employment. And a means to that end is by giving access to finance. And we see already pre-COVID that there were huge amounts of difficulties as well and major obstacles that many micro-entrepreneurs across Europe face in getting access to credits from, for example, through a traditional bank loan. And so what the Commission has done and the EU as such is really to try to put in place a series of different measures over the past decade or so to really support that. So allowing micro-entrepreneurs to get this opportunity to access credit, a small loan, that at the end of the day can make a huge difference. I will not go into the details of the timeline here that you see with the different initiatives, but basically for you to be aware that already pre-COVID a lot has happened, and there's still a lot to happen also for the coming years. Now, if we put all of this together, which is my second point, basically there is a whole sort of a toolbox, if you might like to call it, of a policy response to support the social finance ecosystem, and which includes at its core the microfinance sector. Essentially, we have put in place at the EU 3 key building blocks in place. One is what we call financial instruments. In essence, it's repayable finance. So basically, a loan, for example, that need to be paid back. It could also be guarantees and other instruments. And these are actually implemented under the European Union Programme for Employment and Social Innovation, so as we call EASY. And these are implemented by our partners, the European Investment Fund, which is part of the European Investment Bank Group. And they basically then bring these series of instruments to the markets, to what we call financial intermediaries. So these are basically microfinance institutions, basically, or even banks, that then on-lend this to target groups. So in other words, micro-entrepreneurs, and that those are, we're talking about here about microloans of up to 25,000 euros. and as well social enterprises that basically have at its core mission being generating a positive social impact. And in those cases, it's up to €500,000, so 500,000 euros. That is one part of the building block. The second is because, in essence, repayable finance in itself has a very specific purpose and can be very useful, but not always in all cases. So which is why we've also implemented a series of grants. And these grants are really there to help build up the market and develop basically the market from the ground up by giving a number of grants that really ensure that we have these systemic developments throughout let's say the stages of development of the microfinance sector, but not only really social finance in the broad sense. And here we also support, for example, the European network, so that includes the European Microfinance Network, EMN, and also Microfinance Center, MFC, because really we see that here it is, as was mentioned earlier, it is really an alliance. It is the coalition of the willing that we really want to make sure that all the various different stakeholders that have a stake in the development of the microfinance sector to come together and really move forward together. And then last but not least, there's also another building block because, in essence, finance at the end of the day is not enough in itself. It plays a big part, but it only is part of the equation. There is also advisory support that we have put in place. And so many of you who are connected may know it through what we call the Easy Technical Assistance Program. And there, really, the idea is to provide a series of advisory support, can be through workshops, tailored trainings, for example, in order to support really institutions that are serving the microfinance sector, but also social enterprises in the broad sense. Now, so I'm still here talking about pre-COVID-19. We have also, as part of the financial instruments, so that's part of the first building block, one of our flagship schemes that is implemented by the European Investment Fund. I will not go into any detail on the slide here, but just to explain, as my director, Ms. Manuela Galang, mentioned, this guarantee here is really there to help financial intermediaries, so that includes microfinance institutions, to take on more risk. In essence, basically to lower their risk, be able to lend to the target groups, so in other words, micro entrepreneurs, but also includes underrepresented groups such as women, young people, the elderly, the unemployed. And through this mechanic, this risk sharing mechanism, as we can call it, of the guarantee that the EIF implements on our behalf, it allows basically intermediaries, so microfinance institutions, to cover a part of the risk of their portfolio of loans. So that's the square that you see in the middle here. And this guarantee, which is the dark blue part, basically allows them by taking on part of that risk, and this is free of charge. It allows them then to on-lend even more, and basically to lend to micro entrepreneurs who otherwise would not have been able to access a loan simply because they have a risk profile or they lack collateral where basically financial institutions are basically not able to take on that risk. So that really is one of the key flagship cornerstones of this ecosystem and this toolbox that we've put in place. And actually, we've seen that since it's been implemented now since 2015, so it's been 5 years now. Well, it has been hugely successful. I mean, there are almost 140 operations and deals that have been signed by the European Investment Fund across the EU, so in also beyond, so in 31 different countries. And then we see that actually for every euro that has been put in terms of the EU budget, that has allowed basically to unlock a leverage, what we call leverage, basically of 11 euros. So basically for every €1 that is put in, on average 11 euros ends up in the pockets basically of micro entrepreneurs in terms of really finance has been unlocked. And we hope that actually, based on what we're seeing, it's been evolving very, very positively. And we hope that actually in total, this will unlock over 3 billion euros in financing for micro entrepreneurs, but also for social enterprises. Now, this is pre-COVID-19. So coming to my third point now, of course, as we all know, COVID-19 came along, and as the presenters earlier mentioned, I mean, it has been a tremendous strain on the microfinance sector, not only really on of course, the micro borrowers themselves who are facing lots of uncertainty. I mean, huge shortfalls in revenue streams that haven't been coming through because of the reduction in economic activity. And this in turn has also affected microfinance institutions throughout Europe that are basically under huge amounts of strains. So what we've tried to do is actually, by taking this hugely successful easy guarantee instrument, we've actually, with the European Investment Fund, we looked at ways of how we could make it even more flexible as a part of the response in order to support the sector following the COVID-19 pandemic. And here, for example, we've increased the risk coverage. We've increased also the duration for which this risk coverage extends. So it was 6 years in the case of microfinance, and now it's 7 years. So a number of actions have really been taken to try and really adapt this easy guarantee scheme to make it even more flexible, but really as a part of the response to COVID-19. Now, when it comes to the bigger picture, and I think this was already mentioned a couple of times also before, of course, we've really tried to go for very tailored support for the microfinance sector through this easy guarantee scheme. But let's not forget as well that there is a huge package of comprehensive economic measures that have been taken EU-wide. And here you can see on the slide, which just basically summarizes some of them. And my director, Ms. Manuel already mentioned a few, such as the SURE scheme, which is 100 billion euros to really help in terms of keeping people in jobs. But you also have a number of measures that have also been taken by the European Central Bank, by the European Investment Bank Group. So it is really a plethora of different measures to really support the European economy, but also the various sectors, including the microfinance sector, in these very difficult times. I think I will stop here, Oscar. Here, the idea was really to iterate so the two messages. One is to say that access to finance remains a central theme, and we can see that actually even now, so pre-COVID-19, as you mentioned, Oscar, we saw that there was estimated there was an annual gap of 12.9 billion. Well, now that COVID-19 has come along, we actually expect that to increase even further. So that basically calls on for my second point, which is basically a continued support that is required not only at national levels, where of course national governments have a key role to play, but also where the EU can also step in to help out. And so a continued response and support in that sense will be absolutely critical, because at the end of the day, I mean, we need to keep the taps open. I mean, if you look at it was mentioned that the micro enterprises represent 90% of enterprises in Europe today. I mean, SMEs as such are almost 97% in total, and that includes micro enterprises. I mean, they are the blood of the economy. It was mentioned that small businesses really are the motor of the economy, and also they will fuel the recovery. But in order to fuel that recovery, you need to be able to give them the means to do that. And part of that means, part of that fuel is ensuring that they keep access to finance and are able to continue starting up and developing. And at the end of the day, what we want to do from a policy point of view on the Commission side, but also the EU, is really to help the sector move forward, and also to continue making a decisive contribution in terms of creating jobs, and at the end of the day, having and building a fairer and more inclusive Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this, Shadeen. Indeed, as you mentioned, I mean, I think there are very few initiatives in the world that actually have given the microfinance sector as much oxygen as the EASY program and its predecessors have. So that's absolutely, of course, as you know, this has really given us so many possibilities already, and we hope to be able to build on that for the future as well. So next up in our lineup, we have Monica Scatasta from the Council of Europe Bank. Monica, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And I apologize for having joined in video a little bit late. I had some difficulties connecting for some reason. So good morning to everyone. Thank you for inviting Council of Europe Development Bank to this esteemed lineup. What I would like to do today, I don't have slides for you. I'm trying to spare people from slides and just share some reflections on the basis of the points that have been put on the table by the people who have spoken before me, and reflect in particular on the role that international financial institutions can play in this landscape in terms of supporting microfinance institutions in their heterogeneity and in addressing the different type of barriers that they are facing in terms of actually meeting the demand that, as everybody has indicated today, is growing, will continue growing given the circumstances. I will also touch upon the specificity of the Council of Europe Development Bank, which I will call SEB from now on for short, and the specific focus that the SEB has on the most vulnerable groups in society, and therefore looking at how also what is happening now with COVID increasing the vulnerability of a much larger group in our societies, the impact that this may have also for further access to credit of the most vulnerable groups in this area. And I will conclude with a few ideas about potential next steps and some potential risks that we may be facing given the current circumstances. So Shadeen has already anticipated some of the things I'm going to say. Clearly, international financial institutions have to play a role in putting on the table the type of financial instruments, such as guarantees, and Shadeen has very clearly explained how these work, as well as equity, to support European MFIs in achieving the financial viability when their business models may be impaired, for instance, by some regulatory barriers. I'm thinking about, for instance, interest rate caps in my country, for instance, that may reduce then their capacity to extend their lending and also to reach certain specific groups. In addition, as Shadeen has already said, what we are the role that we can play is not only in providing the appropriate financial instruments, but also in providing appropriate support in terms of capacity building, in terms of advisory, to address some of the main challenges that MFIs are facing today, both in terms of further understanding some of the challenges in their markets, but also in dealing with the issues linked with digitalization and other challenges. Now, when we look then at the specificities of supporting also the most vulnerable population groups, I'm talking about migrants, I'm also talking about women, which, as we know, are being especially impacted by the COVID crisis in terms of access to employment and access to finance in general. Here, the support and the targeting of the support for vulnerable groups explicitly by international financial institutions in their dialogue with MFIs is also very important. And one area that is also needed in terms of providing support for those MFIs that are working with the most vulnerable, which are often also smaller, comes into trying to optimize and support the optimization of internal operation, but also of trying to see whether it's possible to group, to reach scale, for instance, through other modalities, such as the creation of funds that may be then reaching smaller groups of MFIs that are working with some of the most vulnerable groups. I have in mind, in particular, at the moment, a fund that I won't name that works with MFIs targeting Roma populations in some European countries. And And then finally, one point that has not been touched upon, and that with that in a crisis can actually at some point either be overlooked or be put on the back burner, is really the credibility and the transparency in the reporting concerning the impacts, both in terms of social impacts, but also environmental impacts. And this is something that I will touch upon a little bit later. So with regards to the SEB itself, the Council of Europe Development Bank, which has 42 members and was founded in 1956, it is actually the first MDB in Europe, and active in the EU, Western Balkans, Turkey, and some of the Eastern neighbors. Now, the SEB became engaged in microfinance back in 2008, and since then has approved about 500 million in support of MFIs. Now, we have to put things in perspective. Different IFIs have different scale in operations, so if I'm not here clearly to compare the SEB with the EIB or the EIF in terms of volumes and reach. The SEB has had an annual volume of around 4 billion per year in terms of new lending. So mutatis mutandis, what I want to say is that the numbers that we have in terms of microfinance are rather important. And since 2013, the SEB has also focused on trying to reach MFIs that target, as I said, the most vulnerable groups in population, remembering that the SEB has a very specific social mandate. It is the Social Development Bank of Europe, and therefore for us the focus on the most vulnerable people in the population is absolutely fundamental. Another aspect that I think is also important now that we think of the post-COVID situation, actually of the still in COVID situation, is the element that is not just linked with microcredit for entrepreneurs, but also personal microloans with a social purpose. I'm thinking about small loans related to education, health related issues that are so important. We've seen the difficulties that a number of households have, for instance, or have had in keeping children in school in situation of let's say remote learning. We've seen difficulties in accessing healthcare in the countries of origin, for instance, of migrants in Europe, and this type of microloans is also very relevant in a COVID situation. So there's been, as I said, an evolution in the activities of the SEB in this space, and indeed. Through its social dividend account, the SEB has been able to also provide credit enhancement and guarantees to microfinance institutions, in addition to support for technical assistance and capacity building. So I would like just to give you a few examples of the work that we have done, for instance, in terms of support for women economic empowerment, in Bosnia, through the support for Mi Bospo, that is a Bosnian MFI that works both with men and women entrepreneurs, but it's based on the work of foundation that has as an objective the support for gender equality and women economic empowerment in a country like Bosnia, where indeed women are make up a larger share of the population and are often also a part of the informal labor market. So 70% of the loan beneficiaries for Mi Bospo are actually women. The support also for startup finance, for instance, there is support for Q credits in the Netherlands. Very interesting projects financed through that. I'm thinking about, for instance, a shop owner with that focuses on selling dolls that have specific features that enhance self-confidence in kids. So it's not just the fact of reaching the micro entrepreneurs, but also the social impact that the activities of these micro entrepreneurs can have because of the nature of the activity itself. And in terms of activities, another aspect that I think is important for IFIs is try to see whether there are and there can be positive synergies between the different areas in their portfolio in terms of enhancing social impact. And here I'm thinking about, for instance, the fact that SEB finances judicial infrastructure, nice name for prisons, and basically one of the key focus areas is really in enhancing the reinsertion of people who have spent time in judicial, let's say in prison. Allow me to use the word in society, and therefore the support, for instance, that we have provided, also using grants for a program in Italy supported by Permicro, which is called Ricomincio da qui. I'll take it from here. I'll start from here. This is support that is providing really professional orientation, training, mentoring for individuals under probation. And I think the synergies between the support for the social infrastructure in our portfolio and the activities that we support with microfinance, with our microfinance financing are fundamental. I will stop here. I just wanted to give you an idea of the activities that we have in place. But again, going back to what I was saying at the beginning, the key role that IFIs can play in terms of providing guarantees, grants to support the financial viability of MFI entities, but also the support in terms of advisory and the targeting of the grants to support those activities that really reach the most vulnerable group in the population. And finally, the work with MFIs on indicators, which also require advisory work on indicators and trying to really report on the type of social benefits, but also environmental, and we can touch on the environmental aspects later on, because I would like to leave the floor for my ex-colleagues at EIB. Thank you.
That's great, Monica. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's very helpful to see these insights as well. To follow up with the next speaker, we have Bruno Robino from the European Investment Bank here. Bruno, you had a presentation which I have open on my side. Would you like me to share it now?
Yes, please.
Perfect. I'll do it in a moment. Okay. All right. Can people confirm that they can see the presentation?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. You have the floor, Bruno.
Thank you. Thank you, Oscar. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning from Luxembourg. And thank you indeed for the invitation. COVID-19 is certainly one of the most severe pandemic crises affecting the globe. So first, let me take this opportunity to extend my most sincere empathy to the people in Europe and actually in the world who are or have been affected by the virus and have suffered and maybe are still suffering together with their families the consequences of this pandemic. Unfortunately, coronavirus is not only a health crisis, but it's also has also social and economic consequences, as was nicely illustrated by Mr. Oliveira Martins before me. So, since March, April 2020, hundreds of thousands of companies are struggling in Europe, to say nothing about the micro companies. But what was the EIB reaction to this situation? And also, what was the European Commission response to ensure that financial instruments funded by European structural and investment funds were sufficiently geared towards the support of SMEs? Next slide, please. So, let's start with the EIB group, which put together a package of financing measures which could be implemented quickly to ease liquidity shortage, and the majority of them are often carried out in partnership with national promotional banks. So the first one, the most important, is actually started in April. It was an initiative of the EIB to create a guarantee fund of about 25 billion euro, which could support up to 200 billion euros of financing for European companies with a focus on SMEs. I'll come to that. But there were also a number of other measures in the package, which included inter alia 2.2 billion euro which EIF is expected to provide in terms of guarantees to financial intermediaries, hopefully unlocking up to 8 billion euro for SMEs financing. In addition, there are, the EIB will have dedicated liquidity lines to credit institutions to ensure additional working capital for SMEs and mid-caps up to 10 billion euros. There are also dedicated asset-backed securities purchasing programs to allow banks to transfer risks on portfolio of SME loans, mobilizing up to another 10 billion euros of support. Next slide. Then, under the Innofin infectious disease finance facility and also on other centralized instruments, the EIB has a pipeline of 5 billion euro worth of projects in the health sector, primarily, to finance projects that works towards halting the spread of or finding a cure for the coronavirus. The EIB group is also supporting emergency measures to finance urgent infrastructure improvements and equipment needs, particularly in the health sector, using existing framework loans or undisbursed amounts for health projects. There are also a number of measures, actually, lines outside the European Union as part of the Team Euro response to the coronavirus, which basically consists in up to 5.2 billion euros of financing and technical assistance, which will be available through operation in some 100 countries all over the world. The idea here is to strengthen urgent health investments and help sustain jobs and livelihood in the sector most affected by the economic and social impact of the coronavirus. Next. Let's focus on a minute on the largest of the measure, which is the European Guarantee Fund. I mentioned that it was launched in April 2020, and the objective is to create a guarantee fund of 25 billion euro, which could support up to 200 billion of financing for European companies with a focus on the SMEs. But how does the European Guarantee Fund work? Next slide, please. So, participating countries in the European Union provide guarantees proportional to their shares in the European Investment Bank. The guarantees will cover the losses that may occur in the European Guarantee Fund operation of the EIB group. So not only of the EIB, but also of the EIF, which is the specialized arm of the EIB group targeting SMEs. The European Guarantee Fund provides guarantees to free up capital for national promotional banks, local banks, and other financial intermediaries in order to make more finance available for small and medium companies, mid-caps, and corporate. Of course, by sharing the risk across the member states participating in the fund, the overall average cost of the fund is less than the cost of similar national schemes. So there is quite an advantage there. In addition, the project and the participating countries which will benefit from the European Guarantee Fund will share the EIB top-level credit rating for this type of guarantee. Next, who are the beneficiaries of this guarantee fund? Well, with at least 2/3 of the fund earmarked for, the focus is clearly SMEs. And SMEs basically means entrepreneur. Of course, there is also a portion which will be dedicated to small caps and corporates, I would say up to 3,000 employees. But what is interesting is that also public sector companies active in the health sector could benefit from that. And also a portion is dedicated to venture capital and private equity and venture debt operators, which in turn have to build portfolios of SMEs. So this will be the beneficiaries of the guarantee fund. But what is the progress up until mid-October? Thanks. A portfolio of 2.6 billion euro of operation approved are expected to mobilize up to or investments in the water of 11.3 billion euros. Next, please. So, the EIB has put together a short video on the European Guarantee Fund. So, Oscar, if you can play the video.
Indeed. So
Thanks.
to do that, I will just have to stop sharing for one moment and use the WebEx interface to share the video. Okay. There we go. Very well. Did the video play correctly for everybody?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Oscar.
That's great.
Let's go back to normal. I love the fact that coronavirus impacted my balance sheet, but that's the reality. So my previous slides were meant to give you just a bit of a flavor of the European Guarantee Fund, but of course, in search of more information, you can find them at the dedicated EIB webpage for the European Guarantee Fund. So this is the address. And of course, there are a number of leaflets, reports, and documents which have been created during this period. But let's move further. So next one. Let's focus also on one of the several responses of the European Commission, the one related to financial instruments under the European Structural and Investment Fund, specifically targeting SMEs. So, easy financial instruments could play quite an important role in the economy, and especially for SMEs, micro companies. The EU structural funds and national resources can be used to scale up existing financial instruments to support SMEs through loans and guarantee instruments, and to ensure the continuous supply of finance to individuals, to businesses, which in this very moment, need mainly liquidity to finance, to support working capital. Actually, as it was mentioned by Mrs. Geleng in the introductory remarks, the European Commission moved quickly in reviewing certain rules. You might all be aware that the Common Provision Regulation have been amended in April 2020 to mobilize European structural investment funds through financial instruments. These changes comes as a package of measures to respond to the coronavirus outbreak, and they go under the name of Corona Response Investment Initiative 3 and 3+. One was at the beginning of April, was adopted, the other one towards the end of April 2020. Next, please. So the CRI and the CRI+ included a number of modification, I would say of relaxation of the existing rules, which together with other measures such as the temporary framework on state aid and the public procurement communication, have introduced several flexibilities related to financial instruments, mainly for the existing one, but also for the new one. Of course, we are talking about the current programming period. Normally, I would have a set of slides only dedicated to the changes, but just for today, and just as an example, I would mention few of them. So, for example, the need to carry out an ex-ante prior to changing some of the key parameters of financial instruments is now waived in a number of cases, of course, simplifying the life of the managing authorities. Another example is working capital, which is now considered as eligible, or, for example, the new definition of undertakings in difficulty, as with the old definition, virtually all the undertakings were falling into that category, the financing of which is clearly forbidden or excluded by the regulation. Other changes that we often came across in financial instruments reacting to the coronavirus were the provision of or the introduction of longer maturities in the loans, and also the provision of a grant component often combined with the financial instruments. This is typically what we saw during this month as a reaction. Quite a long list of changes, but certainly worth consider this option in order to increase the access to finance for entrepreneurs in your region or in your country. Next slide, please. So as I said, I will not go through all the details of the changes, but what I can do at this point is to point you in the right direction. So on the FICOMPAS, together with the colleagues of the European Commission, DG Regio, DG Employment, and DG Agri, we have put together a fact sheet explaining the essence of all these changes, of this relaxing measure. We also have included in this fact sheet two mini case studies, respectively under ERDF and under ESF, of real case studies of two managing authorities who reacted very quickly, introducing a series of changes in their financial instruments, which could be regarded, which could be used as a source of inspiration for other managing authorities. Next, unfortunately, I cannot show you a video for the CRI and the CRI Plus. When we put together this document, all of us were in a lockdown situation, so meetings, transfer trips were not allowed to shot video, so not possible. So we came up with the idea of a podcast, basically a radio interview on topics related to financial instruments. And the first one of this was about CRI and CRI Plus. And I can only encourage you to listen to the podcast available on the FICOMPAS page. And you see there also the web address. That's it from my side. Thank you. I'm available for questions. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Bruno. It's very good and very creative to set up a podcast session. That's good. I very much look forward to looking into that. In the background, I've gotten a message from one of the other panelists who would like to respond. So, Monica, I think you would like to mention something as well in response to something that Bruno said.
Actually, well, thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to commend as well the creativity of the EIB colleagues. It was a good video, and I'm looking forward to actually also listening to the podcast. I just wanted to come in to say something about the COVID response, because I had not talked about at all about the COVID response on the part of the CEB, and I completely agree with what Bruno was saying, the importance of really reacting very, very fast and very flexibly. And I think that is exactly what CEB did this year. In fact, as I said, given our average approvals of around 4 billion per year, right after the demands from member countries started flowing in, we really went on fast track mode and approved 3.6 billion in loans, of which 1/3 targeting MSMEs, and as Bruno was saying, with also a large focus on working capital in particular. And also we had to respond by also changing some of the requirements in terms of, for instance, limitations on percentage of support for working capital and other such requirements. So concurring simply to the importance of acting quickly, swiftly, flexibly, and at scale, which, as I said, for an entity like the CEB, doing 4 billion a year, having done in a few months 3.6 billion in both the health sector, but also in support for micro and SMEs, has been quite an effort. And joining hands with all of the other IFIs, the Commission, and all of the other entities who are trying to really address this unprecedented crisis that we're facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. And thank you very much, Bruno, for the very interesting presentation. So those were our 4 speakers for the panel today, 2 on the political side and 2 on the financier side, let's say. We had MEP Monica Semedo from the European Commission. We had Shadeen Viratam from the European Commission. We had Monica Scatasta from the SEB, from the Council of Europe Bank, and Bruno Robino from the European Investment Bank. Now, we have come to the end of 11:30, which was when we foresaw the end of this panel. But I did also suggest that there would be a chance for questions and answers. So if there are any questions from the audience at this moment, we could briefly take a moment to respond to 1 or 2 of them. In the meantime, I have not seen anyone raise their hand in the participants list. So I think I'll give about 30 seconds or so for anyone who really wants to ask 1 question. I think we really only have space for 1 or 2. I'll leave just another 20 seconds. I won't count down, but if then there are no questions, we'll move on to the award ceremony. I'm still waiting, just giving 1 more second for people to figure out the interface if that's what they're looking for. But if not, then I think all the speakers have been very clear. Oh, we do have 1. There we go. We have Marcela Corsi. Let's see. I think I can ask my colleagues to unmute Marcela. Marcela, you have the floor.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes, a very quick question indeed, Oscar. Thank you for giving me the chance. There has been a reference several times today to women entrepreneurs. But as a matter of fact, I didn't see in the presentations any specific focus, at least in terms of the financing measures that have been announced. So I would like to have some more information about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcela. Is there anyone from our panelists who would like to respond to that directly? Yep, please go ahead, Monica.
I just wanted to mention, I have an echo. I wasn't sure. Somebody else? No. So in the remarks that I made earlier, indeed, I emphasized the importance of focusing and of identifying MFIs that have the capacity and supporting the capacity also of MFIs to support women entrepreneurs. And I gave the example, for instance, of this MFI entity in Bosnia that we've been working with that focuses really on women entrepreneurs. On average, in our portfolio of microfinance institutional lending, we have about 30% of the lending that goes to women entrepreneurs. I think that this is probably to some extent underestimating because we may have an issue of reporting, and that's why I was stressing so much the importance of reporting and the support also provided for reporting. But then for those, we are actually working increasingly with entities that directly target women entrepreneurs, and therefore we're able to reach much higher percentages in that space. Clearly, this needs to be done also on the basis of an approach that is conscious. There needs to be a conscious targeting. There needs to be a conscious dialogue with the MFIs in this sense. And I know, for instance, that also EIB colleagues probably have something to say in this sense. I don't know if that helps, but I just wanted to say that this is some of the information we can provide you with other examples.
Thanks, Monica. Would either Bruno or Shadeen like to add anything to that?
Shadeen, priority to you.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Can you hear me? No, Bruno, please, by all means, go ahead, and then I'll jump in.
What I would like to say, yes, that it's true that there are no specific actions only targeting women entrepreneurs. Would that be EIF? Of course, there is a growing attention to women entrepreneur. I do not have the statistics at my hand, but of course, in the portfolio, actually underlying portfolio of EIF, and particularly in microfinance, there are quite a number of women entrepreneurs. There is also an attention from the EIF to look at microfinance providers which are looking particularly only to or mainly to women entrepreneurs. There are microfinance providers specialized in this. I'm thinking, I don't know, Fondazione Donna, for example, in Italy, or others. So there is, I would say, a growing movement within the EIB group to pay attention to this. There is also an internal exercise within the EIB group, which just started, to understand what is the level of involvement of, let's say, women entrepreneurs and, in general, gender within the projects that EIB finance. So there is, I would say, a growing attention to this. Probably in the future, and I'm looking at the European Commission, there will be a specific action only related to that. Thanks.
If I can jump in, then Oscar, just to complement what Bruno started saying. So, I mean, looking at the numbers to answer the question. So, if we look at for example, the Easy Guarantee instrument that I mentioned earlier, At the moment, we have around 30% basically of micro entrepreneurs who receive a loan through that instrument that are women. And so basically just to reiterate, when we talk about supporting micro entrepreneurs, of course, what we really focus on is really trying to support access to finance and also by extension then creating jobs and also social inclusion for in particular underrepresented groups. So that includes vulnerable groups, but also underrepresented groups such as women. But in essence, I think when we look at 30%, you could say, you know, as a first reaction, okay, that doesn't sound like quite a lot. I mean, of course, we do want to try and promote as much as possible gender balance. We have to keep in mind as well when we look at the numbers in terms of the micro entrepreneurs and micro enterprises that are actually set up every year. On average, actually, that is more or less in line with the numbers that we see in terms of women-led enterprises. So I think there's more that can be done there. Now, in terms of specific initiatives, this is something that we're also looking into. But definitely, one of the things that we do want to push forward is gender equality, and therefore. But we do have also at the same time a very inclusive approach. So the idea is to really make sure that those who have more difficulties in getting access to finance, but also to starting up and scaling up the business, that they're able to access that. And so basically, and that includes women as an underrepresented group.
Thanks, Shadeen, Bruno, and Monica for all your responses. Marcella, I hope that addressed your question at least to some extent. Great. In the chat, we also had a comment from Nizira in Bosnia, who said she appreciated the attention to the case of Mi Bospo, just because it's a valuable perspective and it's good to be able to bring it up in this forum. Do I see any more questions from the chat? No. Okay. I think then with that. That we will round off this panel discussion. I want to thank again our four speakers today. It was very, very great to have you with us and to hear your interesting presentations. It's very good to know that we have such strong allies indeed around the table to help support this sector in this crucial time. And with that, we'll move over to the European Code of Good Conduct Awards ceremony. Now, to give you a little bit of context to this, last year during the EMD was the first edition of this award ceremony. The idea was to bring together all the microfinance institutions who have qualified for the code. At that point, there were some 45 microfinance institutions, and to give them an opportunity to meet physically with the European Commission. In that case, last year it was Anne Branch, who would then hand them over the award. They would give a photo opportunity. It would give a sort of a good recognition to the MFIs for the great work that they've done qualifying for the code, and then also a thank you to the European Commission, but all the stakeholders involved in setting up the code. Give a chance for those to connect. Now, this year, the idea was to continue this tradition, let's say, this fresh, new tradition, and do another code ceremony. Now, we were hoping that by this time there would be a chance to do it physically in Brussels here again, and of course, that's completely fallen through. So we've had to get creative, and so we've thought of a different format. And this format now consists of first a word by the European Commission, and for that we have with us Nicolas Costella on behalf of Anne Branch, who will say a few words. But then after that, we have a video montage which we've created in collaboration with all the MFIs who have received the award. And yeah, you'll see we had to get a little bit creative given the circumstances and given the fact that nobody could travel very far for this. So we've had to even resort to some special effects, which you can look forward to and see if you can spot them in the video. Having said that, I hope I've piqued your curiosity enough, and I'd like to then hand over the floor to Nicolas from the European Commission. Nicolas, you have the floor.
Thank you, Oscar. And many thanks to the European Microfinance Network and the Microfinance Centre for organising this online conference and this European Code of Good Conduct for Microcredit Provision Award ceremony, and the innovations that you've come up with to organise this in the new circumstances. I know that Anne Branch was very much looking forward to being present today again, and she regrets that she's not able to take part with us today. A year ago, as Oscar mentioned, this Code Award ceremony gathered representatives from many microfinance institutions all together in the same room, if you can still imagine such a thing, to receive the certificate of compliance with the code. It was a special event to celebrate the efforts made by so many institutions, and we're very happy to continue this new tradition now, though in very different circumstances, virtually this time. At that time, a year ago, no one could have possibly imagined the challenges that lay ahead for the European microfinance sector in the year since. As we heard today at this 6th European Microfinance Day online conference, the ongoing coronavirus pandemic has caused a major shock for the microfinance sector in many ways. It's affected citizens, businesses, and microfinance institutions in all EU member states. Many European microfinance institutions have been forced to perform their operations with reduced activities. It's been hard and sometimes not possible to collect loan repayments and to disperse loans as before. It's been difficult for them to meet with clients and to deliver services other than financial ones. They've often had to shorten working hours and reduce the number of staff, which limits what they've been able to do. Their liquidity has been reduced, and at the same time, the cost of financing and the number of portfolios at risk have increased. Micro-entrepreneurs and the self-employed have had to also to deal with coronavirus restrictions, forcing them to reduce their business activities or even to shut down their businesses completely. Since micro-enterprises represent more than 90% of the enterprises in Europe, this vital sector now really needs support to survive the crisis. In response to the pandemic, national governments in the EU member states have introduced a variety of forms of support for both microfinance institutions and for small businesses in general. In terms of EU support, on a wider scale, as mentioned earlier by Manuela Geleng, the European Commission has adopted a comprehensive package of economic measures to help protect jobs and livelihoods. In terms of specific support for the sector, you're, I'm sure, now familiar with the Easy Guarantee, funded by the EU Programme for Employment and Social Innovation, or EASY, with nearly 140 agreements in place across Europe. The Easy Guarantee was amended before the summer. We've heard the details of this, the amendments being to make it even more flexible to take account of the difficult circumstances that microfinance institutions have to operate in at the moment. But financial support is just one part of the equation, and the Easy Technical Assistance Programme has continued to support microfinance institutions with non-financial support activities, such as institutional assessments and ratings, training, as well as webinars, for example, on topics linked to digitalization, management, and the response to the pandemic. Thanks to the microfinance networks, we know that the microfinance institutions have also created their own strategies to help them weather the storm and to keep serving their clients throughout the crisis. These strategies have, for example, included sending surveys to customers to analyze the situation and identify coping mechanisms, more use of existing digital services, and finding new digital solutions to manage products and services. Strengthened communication with clients with more coaching and non-financial services online, and the provision of new emergency loans with better conditions for clients. We also know that the very heterogeneous and diverse European microfinance sector is committed to upholding high ethical lending standards even in times of crisis. And that's particularly important when the procedures are quite likely being made lighter, which can produce risks, and that's easier to cope with when there are high ethical lending standards. The European Code of Good Conduct for Microcredit Provision is one of the instruments to promote these high ethical standards. As of today, 50 microfinance institutions have been awarded the Certificate of Compliance with this European Code of Good Conduct for microcredit provision. A total of 150 non-bank microfinance institutions have signed up to the code, including the ones already awarded, and 78 banks have endorsed the code. To recall, the code was first developed in 2011, taking account of the diverse landscape of the European microfinance sector. It was based on recognized best practices and developed in close consultation with stakeholders. Over the years, it's become a recognized quality label. For micro-entrepreneurs applying for a loan, it provides the assurance that the microfinance institutions are operating in a fair and ethical manner. For investors and funders, it ensures that the sector operates in a transparent manner in line with high reporting standards. For regulators, it offers the reassurance that the sector is operating according to sound business practices and principles and that it's well governed. And as regards the benefits for the microfinance institutions themselves, it's a sound investment to sign up to it or to endorse the code. Although it can be a long process, implementing the code does open up new opportunities and benefits for your institution in terms of enhanced reputation and opening the door to EU support. Recently, the code has been updated with the extensive involvement of key stakeholders, microfinance networks and institutions, and experts. The purpose of this update was to ensure that the clauses reflect changing market realities and capture the diversity of the institutions operating in the European microfinance sector. We thank particularly the University of Salford for facilitating this code update process. And we also thank the microfinance networks, the participating microfinance institutions, and the other experts and stakeholders that took part in the code update. The final version of this updated code was published in June on the European Commission's website. I would encourage all European microfinance institutions to use the code as a benchmark that sets good lending practices in the microfinance sector. In doing so, you're contributing to upholding high ethical lending standards and to building a more resilient and more inclusive Europe. These are challenging times, but at the same time, small steps are taken every day at the local, national and EU levels to weather the storm. We, as the European Commission, hope that by promoting high lending standards, the code has helped the sector to become more robust and adaptable to crises. Finally, I'd like to thank you, all the microfinance institutions, for maintaining the high standards within the sector despite these difficult times. We have every confidence that by acting collectively, we will ride out the storm and emerge stronger. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. All right then. I will get the file ready to share the video. There we go. Everything's preparing. And there we go. That was the little thank you message from all the MFIs that hopefully was a little bit of a refresher to be able to see people's faces again after so long. So at least we hope that it succeeded in doing that, and we hope that you appreciated this as well. So we will be sharing this, of course, through our social media and put the message from the European Commission at the start of it, and then hopefully this can circulate a little bit as a kind of a an award, like a little bit of a symbol for the fact that the European community of microfinance institutions is still reaching out to each other and trying to stay connected, even though we're in collective self-isolation. So to be able to round off this day, I would just like to give the floor to the Director General of EMN, Jorge Ramirez, to just say a few closing words. Thank you from my side, and have a great day, everyone. Jorge, you have the floor.
Yes. Indeed, I don't know if you can see me. Camera, yes, there it goes. Camera, yeah. Sorry. I don't know if you can see me, but you can hear me, which is pretty much enough. Thanks everybody. Actually, it's been an excellent event. One of the things that I enjoyed most has been the video. It's been great. Actually, put me a smile on my face during these challenging times. It was nice to see all of you. I've seen one of the comments that in the Q&A. I think Gabriele Giulietti from Banca Etica has put a comment that pretty much summarizes what we have just seen, not only about the event, but particularly about the video. He says very good video. It gives the idea that we are all a community, the Commission, the investors, and the MFIs working on the same path on inclusive finance in order to include people and giving them an opportunity for a better life. I don't see any better way to wrap up what we have just been doing today. And I want to thank everybody, all the attendees and panelists on behalf of EMN and MFC. And just encourage everybody to adhere yourself to the European Microfinance Day. The EMD is a campaign addressed to enhance the awareness and visibility of the microfinance sector in Europe. To this day, up to today, we have 13 organizations all across from 10 European countries that are already organizing different events, sessions, press releases, in total more than 20 actions that will be done in order to raise the visibility of the actions being carried out by the microfinance industry, which are now more important than ever. So I want to encourage all of you to adhere yourself in the coming days, during the coming weeks, and be able to raise the visibility of how important microfinance sector is going to become now and in the future. Of course, I want to give thanks again, even though Branch has received a lot of thanks during the video. And I want to give thanks to the European Commission, and particularly through the support that continuously gives to EMN and all its actions through the European Union Programme for Employment and Social Innovation, particularly for this campaign, the Microfinance Day, and also for the EIB Group, which the European Investment Bank, EIB Institute, and EIF, which have been sponsoring this activity. I hope you will be able to attend also some other EMD events, indeed, as I say, at local level, and looking forward to see your involvement to raise the standards and the visibility of the sector, which is so badly needed. And we keep in touch in the coming weeks because the EMD have just started. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks. And have a great day, everyone. We'll be closing the call now in a few moments. So take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.